Welcome to Lunch Money. Coming up, the bank fraudbuster who says avoid Facebook Marketplace, another surprise bounce in house prices, and stick around to find out if the stock market's rate relief rally has legs. Hello, I'm Simon Lambert. Joining me on today's Lunch Money is This Is Money's Lee Boyce and Interactive Investor's Richard Hunter. Lee, we've had a warning about social media ahead of Christmas from TSB's fraud director. What's he saying?
He's essentially saying don't do your shopping on social media websites and aka definitely don't do it on Facebook Marketplace unless you're going to go and meet the person who is selling the item. So the whole thing around this is there's been a huge spike in online purchase fraud. What that is when you pay for something that doesn't exist. So you might have fallen for a dodgy ad, it all looks legit, you transfer the money over and you've got nothing you can do about it if that product doesn't exist. 4 in 5 of these scams for the whole of this year have originated on Facebook Marketplace. Now, if you don't know what Facebook Marketplace is, it's the part of the social media website that acts a little bit like eBay. You can list things from around your home on there, cars, all sorts of things, and people essentially pay for it. But the website doesn't have a payment system in place, so you're at the mercy of a bank transfer. And as the guy from TSB says, if you pay that cash over a doorstep and you're actually getting the physical item, that's fine. But if you're doing a bank transfer for something that doesn't exist, it's much murkier ground. And this is such high level fraud in terms of volume. It's taken up a lot of the call centre time for banks, not just TSB. We've had all sorts of banks being vocal about this over the last year. So while it's quite low value, the average scam is about £500 that people lose. It's very high volume, and simply put, the banks are struggling to cope with the sheer number of scams that are originating from Facebook Marketplace.
And I'd imagine that £500 is probably £500 you're very unlikely to see back if you've just transferred it to someone and been defrauded or conned in that way.
Yes.
What are some of the big things that people are being scammed for on Facebook Marketplace?
Well, 20% of all scams at the moment are to do with cars, so cars themselves and car parts. And what fraudsters are relying on is putting up an ad of a car that looks genuine. I mean, you're going to look at a photograph and know that's a real car, but is it actually their car that they're selling? And quite often it's not. And if you transfer over a deposit, they'll try and rush you. They'll say, put a deposit down now, I've had loads of interest in this car, put £1,000 down. If you do that, and that car doesn't exist, it's very murky ground as to whether or not you're going to get that money back because you've authorised the payment. So the big advice is do not buy anything off Facebook Marketplace, especially a big value item like a car, without seeing it first. And there's other parts as well, that other things that are definitely happening on there, like sports tickets, for example. That's a big one. Lots of people want a hot ticket to a concert or a football match, will pay the money for tickets that don't exist. And the highest volume in terms of value is for tradespeople. So if you were trying to get some work done around the house perhaps, and you pay a deposit on Facebook Marketplace, again, it's murky ground because you've authorised that payment, but you've not got the service. And it has been vocalised a lot this year by banks about what's happening on these social media sites, but it feels at the moment that there's been a real inaction from the social media giants.
So that's buyers on Facebook Marketplace, but there's going to be quite a few people trying to raise a little bit of extra money before Christmas, perhaps selling on Facebook Marketplace as well.
Yep.
Now, you're a bit of an expert on this. You've actually written the book, Never Go Broke, about buying and selling things in order to make extra money. Do you have any tips for people selling and how they can protect themselves as well?
Yeah, I mean, my biggest advice would be don't click on any kind of malicious looking link. So you might post something up and then you might get something that looks quite genuine from a buyer that looks interested, saying, is this chest of drawers the same as this one on this website? And then a link, and that could be a phishing attack. So don't click on any links in the Facebook Messenger app. And I would stick with the line of what Paul Davies is saying from TSB. Essentially, if you're going to sell things, I would sell them to people that are going to come. Meet in a public place is the best advice, and make sure that they are a legitimate buyer. And that cash transaction is much better. It's not like in eBay where you have payment protections because it's done via PayPal, for example. If you're just willy-nilly going through your banking app and transferring that money directly into a fraudster's hands, the protections are all but washed away.
Now, in other news today, we have seen another surprise house price bounce. Halifax has followed hot on the heels of Nationwide last week and told us that house prices actually went up in October. I thought they were meant to be falling. What's happening here?
It feels like a real mixed bag at the moment, doesn't it? So yeah, we've had Halifax add 1.1% in October, so £3,000 added to house prices. They're saying that house prices are up £40,000 on pre-pandemic levels, so they're sort of holding steady again now, it almost feels like. And let's not forget, this is the time of year when typically the housing market starts to slow down as it comes up to Christmas. People were saying, probably not going to be able to get that house through, we'll wait until the new year. What's happening and what Halifax are saying in here is simply there is a lack of supply, and what is going up is getting snapped up because there are still people out there who want to move and buy quality homes. So that's helping prop up the market. The other bit that I think is really interesting is the cash buyer element of the market. So while the Halifax house price data, of course, takes its own data and its own mortgages that it's lending out to people, the cash buyer market has become massive this year. 1 in 3 households roughly so far this year are cash. Typically it'd be sort of more like 20%, so that bumped up a bit. And people that are paying by cash have quite a lot of power, because as a seller you would lean towards someone that's paying with cash because of not having a chain and all of that kind of stuff. So that's helping prop up the market. The lack of supply of homes going onto the market as well is just keeping it steady. And some of the experts are saying that perhaps these falls are going to be a bit softer than expected. But as we go into next year, it's hard to know. It feels like the mortgage market is settled, so that makes things a little bit steadier. We've got an autumn statement coming up in a couple of weeks. We know the government loves meddling into the mortgage and the housing market. Could anything happen then? Who knows? But it's a rosier picture for house prices than perhaps the summer when we were at the height of those mortgage rate peaks.
Thank you, Lee. Richard, one of the FTSE's stranger companies has released some results today. Associated British Foods, a company that manages to combine brands such as Ovaltine and Twinings with Primark. The focus tends to be on the high street budget fashion chain element. So how is Primark doing?
Primark's doing extremely well. It's as largely as expected. It had revenue growth of 15% up to £9 billion. And it probably accounts for around half of the entire group's revenue. You're right, it is slightly unusual. It's a good old-fashioned conglomerate made up of 5 divisions: ingredients, agriculture, sugar, grocery, and what it describes as retail, which is basically Primark. But it's Primark which has been the engine of growth over recent quarters. One of the reasons for that is that it's expanding into the US. It opened another 8 stores over the last year, which takes its total to 21. It's got a target of 60 stores in the States by the end of 2026. So that's clearly, in terms of the optimist, very much room for expansion in what could be a massive market. In the UK, at the height of the inflation volatility, what Primark decided to do was only to pass on some selected costs to consumers and basically swallow the rest themselves. So that's had a detrimental impact on Primark's margins, but by the same token, it's kept the shoppers coming through the door in these difficult times. So so far so good for the group, let alone the particular engine of growth at the moment, which is Primark.
After a pretty painful few months for investors, we've seen a bit of a bounce on the stock market over the past week or so. It's been dubbed the rate relief rally. What's going on here, Richard? Can it last?
Yes, we had a particularly difficult October, again around interest rates, but so far so good in November. I think investors are increasingly coming to the conclusion that we have reached the peak of the interest rate hiking cycle. That applies both to the States and the UK, by the way, but obviously the States is the world's largest market. In turn, what we've seen is that bond yields have fallen. Their previous direction of travel had very much been working against the equity market, had indeed had been rising interest rates. So we have indeed seen something of a bounce. To put this into context, of course, the main indices in the States had been positive anyway. It's just that some of that positivity was shaved off by these lingering interest rate concerns. The Nasdaq, for example, the tech index, is up the best part of 30% this year, although admittedly against a fairly poor 2022. So inevitably, and the jury is out, the questions are now starting to be asked as to whether this is a precursor for a Santa rally.
Well, we'll get to that one in December. I don't want to call Christmas too early, Richard. That's all for today's Lunch Money. Thank you very much for watching, and join us on the next show on Thursday. Goodbye.